Thank you, Anu, and welcome everyone. The first thing I want to explain is why a class in logic. That is, this is the value, the motivation for this course. The way I put it is you are your mind. Your mind is yourself. And your happiness depends upon what you choose to do with your mind. You have a choice. How you use it determines what happens, whether you succeed or fail, whether you're happy or unhappy. You can learn the powerful Ayn Rand-like method of using your mind because logic was her power. And that is the reason to increase your brain power, to increase your success and happiness. That's the reason why you need and can gain from a course in logic. But not the logic you'll find in textbooks or university courses. This is a shocker. And it's not something about the evils of modern contemporary philosophy. It goes back further than that. For maybe 200 years, certainly 150 years, logic has been compressed from what Aristotle, the father of logic, created. Aristotle divided logic into three parts: the logic of inferences, the logic of propositions, and the logic of concepts. That is, all the conceptual level abstract operations of the mind are governed by logic, or should be, can be, and ought to be governed by logic. In the last 100, 150 years, only inferences have been discussed as logic. If you take a university course or you look at a logic book, it's almost all inference and almost all deductive inference. Now, deductive inference is a good thing, but the difference between the man on the street and a rational, creative thinker like Ayn Rand, allowing for the intelligence difference. The difference in methodology does not concern anything you'll learn in a logic textbook. It's not about inference. It's not that Ayn Rand used valid syllogisms and the ordinary person uses invalid syllogisms. You know, syllogism is the unit that Aristotle discovered, the simplest form of deduction, the atom. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. All collies are dogs, all dogs are animals, therefore all collies are animals. It's not that people make a whole lot of mistakes in doing that. It's not that people think, well, capitalism is the ideal social system, so we should have socialism. That's not, that kind of mistake is not made. The issue of where the mistakes are made and where the disagreements come from, it's not in perception and it's not in inference. It's not that your eyes give you a different reality where socialism works and is good and just, or our eyes show us that it's bad and other people's eyes should. No, it's not about needing an eye doctor. And it's not about errors in deduction. It's more basic. It comes down to errors in concepts. If you attend the panel discussion with Jordan Peterson in a couple of days, you will find that his disagreements center on different uses of concepts. He has different concepts. He defines them in a different way. He uses them in a different way. And that is why he disagrees with our conclusions. For example, let's take some other, him and other people. You need religion to have morality. Now, it's not an error in deduction. It's not that people get. For morality, you need a code of values based upon a fundamental alternative. The fundamental alternative is life or death. Therefore, you need God to base religion. People don't think like that. Instead, they have a wrong concept of morality and a wrong concept of religion. So the disagreements that you have with people are not about your needing to correct their syllogisms. Okay, there's one error that people make in syllogisms. It's called undistributed middle. People do make this one error, and it's worth knowing. They say, you're an atheist, you must be a communist. Right? You've run into that. And their thinking is, all communists are atheists. You are an atheist. Therefore, you are a communist. And that is an invalid syllogism. They would have to have only communists are atheists. In other words, if you're an atheist, then you're a communist. You're an atheist, therefore you're... That would go through, but they confuse the statement, all communists are atheists, with the statement, all atheists are communists. The first one is true, the second one is false. So that's, a really junior level error that people do make in thinking off the top of their head, and it's easily corrected. But that's not what causes the disagreements we face. That's not the difference between Ayn Rand and other philosophers, that she didn't make the fallacy of undistributed middle. It's about her always defining concepts based on reality. Leonard Peikoff once said to me, you know the way you and I hold the concept chair? Well, that's the way she holds every concept, with that clarity, precision, and concrete reality to it. And that's the difference between a powerful and correct thinker versus the sloppy and wrong thinkers that we're surrounded with so frequently today. So this course is going to cover concepts and a little bit into propositions because they're so intimately connected. This first class is going to be theory, but the course is basically going to be practice. It's going to be homework assignments and working them out in class, because the theory is in my book. It's simple. I'll mention it. The issue is the practice. The issue is working with it. And you have to do that to understand it. But then in the second class, then in the second class, we get into the first exercises, which is a topic I call thinking in examples. Now, Ayn Rand had this term, thinking in principles, and that is really what you want. But to think in principles, you have to think in examples. So this is my kind of provocative title for a subject that I'm very hot on and that you really need to know. You need to know how to think in examples. So we will cover that in a whole class. And then we'll use that to go on to learn how to define terms, and that'll take 2 classes, and that'll be really fun. Then finally, everyone's favorite topic, fallacies. Fallacies identified by Ayn Rand, not the traditional fallacies, which are not bad, like begging the question, ad hominem, appeal to authority, appeal to emotion. Those are, Aristotle defined those, by the way, as he did the nature of the syllogism. That's why he's the father of logic. Those so-called informal fallacies are worth looking at, but they're so commonsensical that you just need to know, oh, ad hominem, attacking the person doesn't disprove his ideas. Good point. Okay. And then you need to deploy that in argument, but that's not the big deal. The big deal is concepts. So that's our schedule. And today, the theory, with one little exercise, is to answer the question, what is logic? So here's your first assignment. It's an in-class assignment. Where do we begin? Where do we begin to answer that question, what is logic? So project yourself giving this class, and you want to say, what is logic? How would you begin? Who wants to volunteer? Now, I want a bad answer. You give me the right answer, and it's going to anticlimax. You got a bad answer? He put his hand down. He's got a good answer. I can give you the bad answer, and it's better than a lot of bad answers. You know, like it's better than the answer, logic, it's a bunch of hot air or something like that. No, the bad answer is you begin by saying logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. That's the bad answer. Okay? What is another bad answer? Anybody else have another bad answer? Okay. Logic is common sense. Any logic is going to be bad. The first thing you have to do is give examples. This kind of gets into thinking in examples, right? Otherwise, if I say to you, what is restruction? What is restruction? How would you begin a course on restruction? See, I always thought there ought to be a term restruction. There's construction, destruction, instruction. Shouldn't there be a word restruction? But there isn't. So you couldn't begin. You say, now the restruction is a form of squigulum that has, you can't define it because nobody knows what it is, including you. So you have to have some clue of what logic is before you can go anywhere. So what would be some examples of logic? Well, it's raining, I should take an umbrella. Or I got for my answer the size of the room for my calculation is 0. And that can't be right. It can't be 0. We're in it. Or I know that altruism means sacrifice, and I know that socialism sacrifices the rich to the needy. So I guess that socialism is a system of altruism. So it's making connections, right, in your mind. I mean, just some common sense beginning ideas of what logic is. And we could throw in something about concepts, like I just did really. How can you define a concept if you don't know what it is? If you don't know what concepts refer to things, concepts are abstract ideas. If you don't know anything about what they refer to, you can't define it. That's logic. Okay, so having, a rough ballpark idea now of what logic is, it's that kind of, it's not about fold into eggs and stir thoroughly. It's not about the Yankees won last night. It's about the kind of things that the inferences and so forth I just mentioned. So now we get to ask the real question. That's just setting the stage. you ask Ayn Rand's question that reboots the system. Because if you just say, okay, what do those things have in common? What's the definition if that's what I'm talking about? All you've got, if you're like most people, is what other people have put in there. You need to take a fresh look at reality, right? And you ask Ayn Rand's power question, what facts of reality give rise to the need for such a thing as logic? Okay, why do we have a concept to stand for those kinds of mental operations? Do we really need a concept like that? Same thing she did about morality. Do we really need a concept of good and bad? Maybe it's all taboo, a myth. Maybe we should throw it out. That's why I call it rebooting. Start from ground zero. Do we need this? I know what it's said to be by people who use that concept. Do we need that concept? So we now go to the heart of this theoretical lecture. What are the facts giving rise to the need for logic? That is, for the concept logic and the use of logic. The first fact is the primacy of existence. And this is so far back, you can't get back any further than the axioms. This is starting from really ground zero. And by the primacy of existence here, just a simple idea, wishes and beliefs don't change facts. Because if they did, you wouldn't need logic. You think, oh, I guess the size of the room is zero, poof, it becomes zero, right? It's raining out, but I don't want it to be raining out. Oh, it's clear. That doesn't happen. So one of the things that means you need to think about things is the facts don't change to snap into line with what you believe. The other is free will. Because the primacy of existence is true about perception too, right? Turning your eyes doesn't create the things that come into view. They're there already and you perceive them, but perception is deterministic. So you don't need any guidance. There's not a science of perceptual logic. You just have your eyes open. You may need to know where to look, but the looking and seeing when you look, when you turn your head and explore, is automatic. But when you think, you control it. You must choose to do it. People don't do it. People don't choose to think. They don't choose to judge. They don't choose to activate the knowledge that's in there, and they don't decide whether that idea that occurred to them is right or wrong. A simple example. I'm going to be late if I keep giving simple examples. I'm working, and a thought occurs to me, I need another soda. I need some potato chips, right? If I don't do anything, I'm going to get up and go get that soda and potato chips. But I have the power to say, is that right? And say, no, I don't. Not now. This is not the right thing. This won't work for me. But I don't have to do it if I don't intervene, and it's a thought with an urge. I should get some soda. I'm going to get it. So your free will is to use your mind to evaluate what comes up and to send questions down to get information, not just wait for it to pop into your mind. Okay, that's another large subject that I cover in my psychoepistemology lectures. Because existence exists independently of us, because we have a choice in how we proceed to attempt to understand it, we're not omniscient, and because we start from sense perception, we're not omniscient. That is, we don't wake up and know everything. And we're not infallible. We can get it wrong. Ignorance is possible and error is possible. There's a lot of ignorance out there and there's a lot of error out there. And you need a way to get away from it or up from it. Up from error, up from ignorance. Two good book titles. So logic is what we create to give us the navigation away from ignorance towards knowledge and avoiding error, checking what we do to make sure we're not in error. We have a need for cognitive guidance, and logic is the name. It's not that logic is that. Logic doesn't exist yet. And say, let's call the method of guiding our minds to knowledge and correct knowledge, real knowledge, let's call that, logic. Exactly what Ayn Rand does with morality. We need to know what to do to keep us alive where we have a choice. If we don't, we'll die. So we need to know how to act. How do I act? Do I lie in bed or get up? Do I go to work or not? Do I get in a fight with my boss or not? Do I continue in this job or take a new job or not? Do I buy this house or not? You need guidance, not the pre-canned answers, but a way to answer that by reference to a code of values. Let's call that, morality. So it starts from the needs of a volitional consciousness and goes to logic in the one case and morality in the other. So logic is simply the right mental steps to take to gain knowledge of reality and to know that it really is knowledge of reality. So what are those steps? Now we're getting to what is logic. Okay, we can see what creates a need for it. We need to have a way to avoid ignorance, to gain knowledge, and to check it that it is knowledge, not something that counterfeits as knowledge. What are the requirements of knowing reality? Well, analogy is a good thing. It's not the key to the magic kingdom, but analogies are very helpful. They're like a temporary conceptual structure that you make. Building knowledge is like building a house. Man is not omniscient. Does not merely mean, we don't know everything. It does mean that, sure. It means we don't know everything, but it also is a way of saying we build knowledge. We get a little bit of knowledge, we fit it in, if we can, to our existing structure. If it contradicts our existing structure, it's a mistake, right? But knowledge is acquired bit by bit, integrated into the structure. It grows, it accretes over time. It is a progressing, evolving is fraught with danger, progressing structure. And that's why I took building a house as an example. To build a house, you need the right materials. The materials have to be rightly oriented to each other, meaning, so you got this beam and this beam, and you're not going to join them like this or like that. You're going to join them like this to get the structure you want, right? And they have to be joined firmly, not with chewing gum, not with one nail, but they have to be really solidly connected to each other. Logic is like that. You need the right materials, which is pre-existing knowledge. Those are your materials. Now, pre-existing knowledge includes and begins with observation through your senses. So it all comes back to starting with your senses. That's your material. But then you've learned some things since you were born. And those are the material for continuing. So knowledge builds on knowledge. That's your material, starting with perception. And you have to have them rightly oriented to each other. Now, I asked myself, what the hell would that mean in regard to logic? And then it hit me. It means several things. One of it is compared in terms of essentials. So you don't compare, Bernie Sanders spoke loudly and Ayn Rand spoke loudly, so they're pretty much the same. You compare them in terms of and a fundamental characteristic. We'll get into that more. It means other things too, but the analogy does hold up. You can't just take any one piece of knowledge and jam it into any other piece of knowledge. You have to find where they connect. And then you have to join them firmly, which technically is called integration. The items of knowledge have to be integrated, and the means of the integration is very interesting. It's clear awareness of something, right? It's clear awareness. The means of integration is simply consciousness, is simply, oh. Of what? Of the one in the many. Of sameness amidst differences. Sameness amidst differences. What does that mean? What we get out of this is that logic, I'm going to tell you what it means in a second, but the summary is logic is a set of integrative procedures for building knowledge and verifying that one has done so correctly. It's a tool of integration, the tool of building, of combining, connecting, welding together new knowledge with old knowledge. By grasping sameness amidst difference. All right, now let's go back to our little hierarchy here of inference, proposition, and concepts to see what sameness amidst difference means in each case. Inference is a really interesting case. I'm going to take deduction because that's easier to explain and better understood. Deductive inference works entirely by sameness amidst difference. There's two premises that are connected by this so-called middle term, like S is M is P, therefore S is P. Now I've italicized and bolded the M's there. That's the middle. S is for subject, P is for predicate, M is for middle. So what we really have is you link S to M, you link M to P, and then you say, oh, S has that same connection to P through M. So it only works if the middle term is the same term in the first premise and the second premise. So it connects by a sameness, the M in the middle. Pretty simple. Aristotle discovered that. Propositions. In propositional identification, proposition is a sentence that says one thing. You know, S is P. Socrates is mortal. The podium is wooden. The same concept subsumes varying reference. I say the table is wooden. That has no meaning unless I have the concept wooden, which stands for the material and this and that and the other and the trees and so forth. Socrates is mortal has no meaning unless I'm saying Socrates is like that dog that died, it's like that plant that died. Someday Socrates will be dead like them. If you don't know about any other instances of death, you haven't got the concept, you can't make the statement. So propositional identification works because you have a group of similar things conceptualized under your P, and you say, hey, this goes with them. It's different, but it belongs in that category. It's the same as them in some respect. So to go into a little more detail, and you can just go to sleep during this part if you're not interested. S is P means S integrates with the other things in category P, or technically S is a unit of P in technical objectivist terms. Therefore, apply to S what you know about P. And that's the theory of the function of propositions that I presented in my last series of logic lectures and is in my book, that the function of a proposition is to download the knowledge you've gained from other cases to this new case. So it is a sameness that in the difference that makes possible and valuable proposition telling you what something is. Now, in concept formation, it's even more technical, so I'm not going to go into it, but the objectivist theory, Ayn Rand's breakthrough identification, is that you can integrate concretes, existence, having the same distinguishing characteristic in varying measurements. The one in the many is the characteristic, the measurements vary. Blue integrates all the various shades of blue, which are different wavelengths of light. So the measurements in angstroms of the wavelength of light varies, but they're all in the blue range. They all have the same characteristic. Okay, so that is the sameness in the difference. And there's one more thing we need to tie up our understanding of what is logic, and that's the axioms. And this is more familiar. This is sort of high-power Aristotle. Aristotle identified the basic principle of existence, which is the law of identity. Now, he never refers to a law of identity in his text, but he does say a thing is itself. And he does get the next point, which, no, not the next point on this slide. The A is A, he never said that. That was a guy named, well, you all know his name, right? Antonios Andreas, of course. Now, some obscure medieval logician came up with the formula A is A. It wasn't Aristotle, but it expresses the essence of what Aristotle was going for. Logic is concerned with the meaning of that for cognition, the meaning of the law of identity for cognition, and that Aristotle did explicitly identify and praise and say was the most certain principle of all in the metaphysics, book Gamma. Non-contradiction. A isn't non-A, to use a formula. He didn't use that. There's another law that's generally taught, it's called exclusive middle. Either thing is A or it isn't. It can't be neither A nor non-A. And I discovered that that's a corollary of non-contradiction. And it really says the thing can't both differ from something and not differ from that same thing. That would be a contradiction. It differs from it and it doesn't differ from it. So if it's non-A, then it's different from A. It's different from A, it's A. So we come to the definition of logic, and this is fascinating. So we finally come to where I said was the wrong answer to begin with, and maybe now you see why. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. Now I went through, in preparing, I went through 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 of my own definitions, right? And in the end, I came back to, this really nails it. I was amazed because I always thought it was a little bit, taken from a novel, which it is. It's a little bit informal and abbreviated. But after I really got into it, I realized it's well, we'll see what it means. Why does she say art? Because it's a method involving choice and judgment, not a mechanical, algorithmic method, a method involving choice and judgment, and its identification, which is the discovery of identity. That's all that identification means, okay? So it's a discovery of what things are by a method that is not mechanical or algorithmic or deterministic, but which involves your judging how to use your mind and therefore being able to refer to principles in it. And the essence of it is by integration. which means finding what's the same amidst the differences, that clear awareness of, hey, this is blue, even though it's a different shade of blue. So I'm going to call it blue and apply my knowledge of blue to it. For instance, if I shine a yellow light on it, it'll look black, and I know that from these other blues. And here's Ayn Rand's statement, which is powerful on many levels, that culminates in that definition. All thinking is a process of identification and integration. Man learns to identify a perceived object as a table. He learns that the table is made of wood. He learns that the wood consists of cells, that the cells consist of molecules, that the molecules consist of atoms. All through the process, the work of his mind consists of answers to a single question: what is it? In other words, what is its identity? His means to establish the truth of his answers is logic, and logic rests on the axiom that existence exists. And we see how it does. Wishes don't make it so. You may not want it to be there, but it's there. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. That's in Galt's speech in the hardcover, page 1016. Now, I'm going to cover, since people are really interested in the axioms, and I need to make it concretely real, I'm going to cover the axioms in a little more detail, but we now know what logic is. Briefly, there are three traditional axioms, even though I reduce them to two: identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. And what they have to do with, and this is what's a little new that I'm giving you, is drawing a line in a certain domain between one thing and not being that thing. It's a differentiation. If you know Ayn Rand's theory of concept formation, to form a concept is to distinguish a range from a foil, and from everything outside that range, you draw a line. Here I'm calling it A and non-A, like blue and not blue, big and not big, capitalism and not capitalism. That's the context, and really that's all that the axioms are going to say. They're just going to say what that is. The A is A. You can't be in A and non-A. You can't be in that white area and the black area at the same time. And you can't be neither. Either you're in the A, and if you're not in that, you're in non-A, because that's what non-A means. Non-A means different from A. Now that's an important point, and you know who discovered that? Antonius? No. A man who is known to his friends as Fatty. Plato. Plato means the broad. Platon, the broad. He was a wide guy. So the founder of Western philosophy was known as Fatty. So he, one of the really good things he did, among the very, very bad things he did, was he said not A means other than A. It means different from A. It means being something else. And the law of identity says to be is to be something. So non-A is not the void, non-existent. Non-A is some other identity. Not blue is green or red or pink or white. It's not nothing. Even if it's colorless, that means transparent. That's something, right? And a contradiction amounts to saying a thing can't, to say non-contradiction, to say a thing can't be what it's different from. The whole point of the only way you can make that A category and form that A concept is to say blue is different. Altruism is different from egoism. Force is different from voluntary interaction. If you don't see that, you haven't got a concept. So the concept consists in making a differentiation. So a thing can't be under a concept and be the same as what it was differentiated from. And excluded middle comes out to be different from A is to be something else, which is what I said earlier, non-A. That's what Plato discovered, and it's very, very important. So let me kind of wind this up, and my watch is not necessarily giving me the correct time, but we are coming to a place where we can take questions. The contributions of Aristotle versus those of Ayn Rand. I originally wrote the contributions of Aristotle versus Ayn Rand. No, wait a minute. They're in harmony. It's just they made different contributions, so I'm putting the of in there too. I want to distinguish what Aristotle contributed from what Ayn Rand contributed. Aristotle contributed the metaphysical part. Aristotle contributed that things are what they are and aren't what they aren't. The law of non-contradiction. He also contributed that what you should do about it, like don't contradict yourself because reality isn't that way. The thing you're trying to know, I'm trying to know about politics. Don't say we need freedom and tariffs. Make America great again and put on controls. You can't combine contradictory things. So that's Aristotelian. What Ayn Rand contributed was a whole different level. She accepted, of course, and praised and lauded to the skies Aristotle and his contribution here. What Ayn Rand contributed is the same facts that we say about the external world applies to our minds. Our minds are something. Our minds can't have contradictory ideas. Not shouldn't. Our minds cannot have contradictory ideas. You either have to make a decision or not make a decision for either or. Look at James Taggart at the beginning, the first scene of Atlas. So are we not going to use reared metal rails? I haven't said that. So we are going to use them. I haven't said that either. That's the nature of the dialogue in that first scene. He's avoiding in consciousness recognizing excluded middle. What is the identity of consciousness? Students of objectivism who read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology get the idea, yeah, consciousness has identity, and we have to take that into account. But what is it? What is the identity of consciousness that impacts logic? I mean, there are many things about the identity of consciousness, like it's an action. But what is it about the identity of consciousness that has significance for us as thinkers that we have to use as our guide that Ayn Rand discovered? There are two facts. There's really three, but one of them I mentioned already. That's free will. That's part of the identity of consciousness. But that just means we need some guide. But the two parts that guide are one that Aristotle recognized but didn't really completely carry through to his epistemology, or if he did, he didn't do it clearly enough for us to get the forceful message. Perception is the base. Now, Aristotle held that, and it was important, but Ayn Rand really stresses it. And the other is what we call the crow epistemology, or what she called the crow epistemology. You can only hold a few units, less than 7, less than 8 for sure, in consciousness at one time, in focal awareness at one time. So if I say 7, 1, 2, what did I say? okay, if I say 94360952178, what did I say? A lot of numbers, yeah. Many. That's the way the crows reacted too. It goes back to a story in the journal Nature, the same journal that exists today on science. Nature, there was a story about crows, which you can ask him about in the question period or read in ITOE, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. It's an interesting story about the mental capacity of crows. And the same thing applies to human beings, but we have the ability to transcend the limits of our crow by condensing into concepts. And that's the whole secret of what makes man human, rational, logical, productive, creative, self-aware, etc., is that we have the ability to condense many into one. So we can have the concept number rather than just see the difference between 2 fingers and 3 fingers. We can count them. And, of course, all mathematics. And every word I'm saying is a concept that condenses a great deal of knowledge. So the crow epistemology is amazing. The limits and how you have to recognize them and be economical is amazingly powerful. It's not a totally unknown fact. Psychologists do recognize something in this area, that there's a limit on cognitive capacity per unit time. But only Ayn Rand grasped this fundamental significance for everything man does and is. We won't be able to go into everything about that, but one implication is I can't go on talking forever. I will overload your crow. You can't take it all in. So we are now ready to conclude this class with a homework assignment for next time. The next class is thinking in examples, and I'm going to give you 2 things I want you to come in with examples of, and I'm going to ask you what you have. The first is equivocation. Now, if you don't know what equivocation is, it's a logical fallacy, then you can't give examples of it. But if you have an idea of what it is, come up with some examples of it. 2 would be fine. 3 would be better. That I give as a kind of simple one. Here's a harder one. Philosophy determines the course of history. Try to come in with some examples of that. And the first one that comes to your mind will be from Ayn Rand and objectivism. No doubt. That's okay, get that out, but then try to come up with some that you haven't heard already, your fresh, original examples. So that's the end of class 1, and I'm ready for questions in the time 10 minutes I think we have. There's a microphone for people to come up and ask questions. Now, one question you can ask me is, what were you going to say that you cut for time? That's a wonderful question. I have an fairly interesting thing to say. Al.
My question is about one of the classical syllogisms that you mentioned.
Okay.
All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And never been clear on what that syllogism adds to my knowledge, if anything. If I have already grasped
the general
statement.
Now that's an interesting question. Go ahead and finish if you've already grasped.
If I've already grasped that all men are mortal, I know that Socrates is mortal. I would not wonder about Socrates. Even if I saw his hair turning gray and most men live to 90, he lived to 91, I wouldn't wonder, is Socrates also mortal?
Okay, could everyone hear that question? Because that's an excellent question. And it's been discussed in the history of logic. The premise, all men are mortal, already includes Socrates. So it's no news to you when you say, well, Socrates is a man, therefore he's going to die. But it is news to you if you've never had that thought before. This is the difference between implicit and explicit. You knew it by implication, but you have to draw that implication yourself. It's not in consciousness unless it gets into consciousness. So the fact that, I mean, you can look at any mathematical calculation you have to perform. What is 27 into 1403? Well, you know that already. It's implicit in the problem. There's no new work to be done, but you have to work to figure it out, even though it's already set, and it's already implicit in your understanding of the concepts 1401 and 23. So you have to make it explicit, and that's what deduction is. Deduction is explication. It is the word should probably be explicitization or explicitification, but they call it explication, making explicit what's implicit. There was one example given in a logic text that is worth hearing of how making something explicit that's implicit can be shocking news. A priest was going to introduce a well-known person from a neighboring community, and the guy was late. The guy was he was speaking before an audience, right? And the guy who was going to introduce was late. So to fill the time, the priest says, Mr. Jenkins, I've known for a long, long time. No, that's not the right way to tell the story. To fill the time, he says, let me tell you some stories about my experience. I may have ruined the joke. It's not a joke. Let me tell you some stories from my life that are interesting. I once did this and once did that, and my very first very first person when I started taking confession, confessed to me that he had murdered someone, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't violate my oath and turn him over to the police. It was a terrible quandary. Oh, I see here Mr. Jenkins arrived. Come on up. And Mr. Jenkins, he says, Father Abbott may not remember, but I was his first penitent. Okay, so my first penitent would confess to a murder. I was his first penitent. Conclusion, I was a murderer. Pretty big news that. Even though it's implicit, it needs to be made explicit. But God, the whole struggle in life is to make active, explicit, in full, clear awareness that which you know but hadn't yet made it explicit. Oh my God, I'm late for that appointment. I mean, that's a very simple. You knew that already, but it wasn't active in your awareness. Or, suppose you're arguing with someone and you want to convince them the government is force, the government is a gun. You're not going to tell him anything he didn't already know. You're going to activate knowledge he had. Like, what's the difference between what a government can do to you and how it gets its rules obeyed versus any other institution? Like, You're in a sports club. If you break the rules of the sports club, what happens to you? Well, they throw you out of the club, or they say bad things about you in the club meetings. What happens if you break the laws of a government? Oh, you go to jail. So it's not like, you do? I didn't know you went to jail. What does that mean? What happens there? Or you mean the Fraternal Order of the Elks can't send someone to the electric chair? I didn't know that. They have all the knowledge they need. They're just not bringing it together in focal awareness. So the syllogism, the deduction, the explication is the crucial thing to make you act on your, not make you, but let you act on your knowledge. So, great question, Al. Thank you. Yes.
You gave an analogy between knowledge and a house, and you said that when building a house, something you are concerned with is the form and the matter, essentially. What it's constructed of, and then how the different parts are conjoined
You
together.
could put it that way, yeah.
Right. My question is, what motivates that discussion? When I think of logic and knowledge in general, I think of a lot of different things we could talk about, a lot of different aspects of knowledge and logic that we would be motivated to think about. What motivated that particular identification on your part?
Yeah, another good question. The thing that's distinctive to the objectivist understanding of logic is the role of context and hierarchy. Okay, it's not the syllogism. There are other things about concepts and propositions that other people do grasp. For instance, if you get a logic textbook, there will be a chapter on definitions. It will be lousy, but they understand the value of defining a term, sort of. But the idea that there's a hierarchy of knowledge and that you must obey that, which in building would mean you can't build the third floor before you've laid the foundations. The idea of context, which is that you have to take into account everything you know, not just the two little things you have in your mind at any one moment, is not understood. So the analogy to building a house really changes your perspective on logic from, well, it's some kind of manipulation of symbols, to it's producing a product, it's producing an integrated thing that you can use. It's adding on to an existing structure step by step in a way you can't violate, or else you'll have garbage. So it is a very helpful analogy, and that's what motivated it. Thank you.